I'm Leah Bruner, and I'm an NDISC fellow here at Notre Dame, and I will be interviewing Katy today. Could you please just summarize your central idea and main argument of your paper, as well as explain how it helps us understand real-life conflicts?
Absolutely. So the main idea of the paper is that states fight over territory in part because they wish to win. And this desire to win, the idea that you're trying to beat out your competitor and you don't want to lose in a competition, motivates territorial conflicts. So that's the basic idea that we're getting at. This is separate and apart from any of the other reasons that states might fight wars, especially over territory. And we think this is really important, in part because states fight wars over even really small pieces of land that are so small that they don't obviously confer any material benefits. So think of something like the Skaku Islands or the Zhenbao Island, which was one of the causes of war between two nuclear powers, between China and the Soviet Union. These types of seizures are not actually all that unusual, but they're not obviously motivated by connections to historical homelands, the desire to reconnect ethnic kin. So these are often uninhabited territories, nor do they have a lot of material consequences. But they're responsible for almost 50% of interstate conflicts since 1945. Right? So this is a really important source of conflict in the world. And so understanding the degree to which this desire to win motivates those types of fights is important for our research.
Kind of building off that, your paper talks a lot about this idea of like competition value, competition land. Could you explain in simple terms what that exactly means and how it differs than just simply valuing land just for the sake of valuing it?
Yeah, so when we talk about competition value, we define it as the additional utility that we attach to an object because of the fact that we wish to win. In other words, it's because another actor disputes that same object. Right, so you can think of a piece of land as having value from lots of different sources, right? Maybe there's oil there, maybe there are fishing grounds or other material resources, or maybe there's religious significance like the city of Jerusalem, for example. All of those things are connected to the ground itself. Competition value is anything that's sort of disconnected from that. And to give you an example, I really like Great British Bake Off. Right? This is a reality competition show in the UK where people spend extraordinary time and effort to bake the best bread and cakes and cookies. And at the end of the day, after weeks and years sometimes of training and effort, they get a pie plate. Now this pie plate has some material value, right? A really nice pie plate might cost a couple $100s, right? And of course there is this signaling value that says like, look, I got this rare object, and rare objects tend to be worth more. But these people are also motivated by something else. And that other thing is what we're trying to capture in competition value, because they're not just going for the pie plate, they're going to demonstrate that they're the best, that they won, that they beat their competitors, and they get this emotional satisfaction that is separate and apart from the pie plate, the object in dispute. And that's the thing that we're trying to capture with competition value. The thing that is relational, depends on this social setting, and can't be reduced to simply the material good itself.
Sort of building off that, like you said, it seems like what they really value is the land. And I know that other scholars from other different perspectives have different theories about this, such as, sacred homeland theories. How does your idea of competition land sort of build off those theories, and how does it challenge the conventional wisdom in the field?
Okay, great question. So it both builds off and challenges them. I'd say previous research basically says that states fight over territory because it is valuable. Right? And they measure this in all sorts of ways, right? It might be strategic value, like the Golan Heights. This is valuable to both Israel and Syria because it gives them the high ground, right? And so you imagine that territories that have higher strategic value are going to elicit more competition. States will fight more fiercely to obtain the strategically valuable good. Same if it's material value, or again, if it has some sort of intrinsic value for historical ownership, or sort of an ethnic connection for people who live on the land. Our theory doesn't say all those things are wrong, right? We think that those are important motivators for territorial conflict. But we're also arguing that instead of drawing a causal arrow from the value of the territory to competition, we can also draw a causal arrow from competition to territorial value. In other words, the mere fact that there is a competitor makes the thing more valuable, right? So that it goes in both directions, value to competition and competition to value. And so in this way, we're really building on some of this previous work by showing the reverse relationship that hasn't been discussed as thoroughly.
And then building off of kind of what you've mentioned a little bit earlier, you use a case study of Skaku Islands in Japan and that dispute going on there. Could you explain why you specifically chose that case study and then how it helps you kind of tease apart this idea of competition land?
Yeah, so we chose that particular case for a couple of reasons. One, because we have this unusual experimental design where we manipulate the source of the loss of a particular piece of territory, in this case, the Skaku Islands. And we needed to be able to credibly say that either a competitor has taken this territory in a bloodless manner, right? So there can't be people there that would have to be sort of, that would die in the process of a conquest attempt. And we also had to be able to make a credible case that some natural phenomenon could cause the disappearance of this piece of territory, again, without causing further widespread damage. So we need something that's remote, we need something that's uninhabited, and ideally we wanted something that had limited material value, right? There's not no material value in the Skaku Islands, but we wanted it to be somewhat minimal. Because we also test a hypothesis about rivalry, the degree to which we're more competitive with rivals than other actors. We also wanted a piece of territory that was claimed by at least 3 different parties. And the Skakus are claimed by Japan, who holds administrative control. They're also claimed by China, and they're also claimed by Taiwan. And when you combine remote, uninhabited with at least 3 claimants, and the third thing, which is public awareness sufficient that we could do this in a survey setting, it basically is just that. So it sort of really minimized our case set. As far as why we chose to do an experiment, if you're trying to understand motivations for territorial conflict and you're looking historically at individual cases, there's sort of 2 places that you might look. You might look at what actors do or what actors say. If we just looked at what actors did, it would be really hard to separate our argument from all of those other arguments, because competition value implies, well, that actors will fiercely compete over territory. So does material value arguments, right? We might observe fierce competition over territory, and it's going to be hard to separate those 2. And if we just look at what actors say, again, we run into problems, because an actor who is sincerely competing over, let's say, the Skaku Islands because they want to compete with their rival might nevertheless claim that it's because a 1960s UN report said there were hydrocarbon resources in the area. And so what they say might not necessarily represent their true motives, but we can't look into their head and know if they're lying or telling the truth. So what actors say could simply be a post hoc justification or rationalization. And so instead, we chose to do an experiment where we can hold constant a lot of those different factors. So we can hold constant the material value of the land, we can hold constant the ideational value of the land, and manipulate only the thing that we care about, which in this case is whether the islands are lost to a competitor or to a natural event. And if we observe a difference between those 2 scenarios, we can be reasonably confident that it's due to competition value and not any of these other explanations.